My day's journey. It was a sunny morning when I decided to venture out and to do something new, something different, to introduce some variety into my life. So I grabbed my go bag and a bottle of wine. As I stepped out of the house, the sun dazzled me, and I felt its warmth filling me. With my black leather bag slung over my shoulder, I walked a bit through the neighborhood, past houses and front gardens, and through the quiet suburbs until I reached the city center. I walked up to the train station, where, unlike the suburb, the many people, the familiar scents of the station, mostly of fresh bread rolls and various perfumes, awaited me. While I decided what to do next, I grabbed one of the available bench seats. The cold iron was a real contrast for my still warm legs. There, I sat for a while, watching people rush past me. A couple who greeted each other with joy. A family happily joining a train that would take them on their long-awaited holiday. Many students headed home after their semester, and commuters. As I watched all the people scurrying past me, driving away and heading home, I made a decision. I would leave, if only for a short amount of time. At that very moment, a train pulled into the station. Without another moment's hesitation, I pulled my long-term ticket out of my wallet and climbed aboard. I walked through a couple of cars before finally settling into an empty seat. Sitting next to me were 3 other people. An elderly woman with short gray hair scrolling through a magazine, a 30-year-old man with dark hair typing leisurely on his laptop, and a slightly younger woman with long brown hair and headphones, staring at her phone almost as if she was mesmerized. The train started slowly moving out of the monotonous station, through the city, past the suburbs. We passed through many small towns. 10 stops later, the older lady left the compartment. As she walked past me, I smelled her perfume for the first time, with lovely hints of vanilla and fresh-baked cake. I smiled at her briefly as she departed to disembark. We rode on, and I looked out the window. In front of me were vast fields and green forests that shone beautifully. We rode past more small villages. At every stop, new passengers would board and walk through our car, searching for the best seat. After we had ridden for a while, the weather changed. The blazing sun disappeared behind thick clouds, and sometime later, small raindrops began to fall, glistening the view through the windows. Even though it was barely audible above the sound of the moving train, the sound of the raindrops felt to me as it always does, calming, reassuring. As more and more water fell, the look of the landscape also changed. Previously radiant forests were flooded with water, and the fields were no longer dry. Nature seemed to be refreshed by this extended burst from the clouds. As the journey continued, I still didn't know where my path would lead me. At the next stop, another passenger, a small child, got off. As the train slowly began to move out of the rain, I noticed as a rainbow began to form in the sky, featuring the most beautiful colors I had ever seen. Magenta red, a sunny yellow, a pure green, ocean blue, and some purple near the horizon. As I gazed into this wonderful display of colors, it came to me that I ought to disembark as soon as the rain had completely dissipated. So, after a while, with a cloudless, sunny sky overhead, I left the train. As I stepped outside, I saw in front of me an older brick building. The lovely sun was again warming my skin, and I noticed a pleasant breeze. The air smelled of sea and salt. I heard people talking happily and decided to head in their direction. So I walked over the still slightly wet pebbles to the street. In the distance, I saw more people walking around delightedly. I followed them into an old town. I walked along a cobblestone way and saw older-looking houses on both the left and right. I passed small shops and cafes. I then reached an open space with a fountain in the middle, with water shooting up. I found a nearby bench where flowers were planted in a bucket next to it. I saw a bee buzzing, which settled next to me on one of the many colorful daisies. After watching the bee for a time, I decided it was time to eat something. So I walked into a cozy little cafe and up to the counter where a wondrous variety of ice cream flavors was on display. I turned to the saleswoman and ordered a lemon ice cream cone, with which I headed back outside to the bench. The ice cream tasted wonderfully lemony and melted on my tongue. I felt so completely comfortable there on my bench with my lemon ice cream in my hand in a town I'd never seen before. And yet, I wanted still more from the day, because this was not the right place to drink a glass of wine. So I finished my ice cream and got up and walked down the shop-lined street until I reached an intersection where I decided to turn into a small tree-lined alley. As I sauntered down it, the more dense the trees became, eventually giving way to an avenue. As I continued to walk, an incredibly flowery smell filled my senses. It thrilled me, and I decided to follow it. So I turned off the beautiful avenue and down a few small nested streets until I reached a field. In front of me stretched a broad red-colored field. As I approached, I realized it was a poppy field. These were the largest and most beautiful poppies I had ever seen. I stepped a single step into the poppies. They shone brightly in the sun, which shone warmly on my head. Slowly, I stepped further into the poppies and heard some nearby birds chirping. I looked up and saw them flying in circles far above the field, singing their songs. Leaving the field, I walked along a dirt road, at the end of which a forest appeared. The closer I got, I smelled a strong scent of fresh fir trees, and the chirping of birds became even louder. The forest was not overly thick. Between the trees, magical sunbeams found their way through the thicket to the forest floor. It was cooler here, but also a pleasant change from the warm sun. As I walked through the woods, I heard a little crackle in the thicket and quickly turned to the right and saw a deer jump over the forest path. Startled, I stopped for a moment, but then continued on, and soon the end of the path brightened, and I stepped out of the woods. I walked through a green meadow that ended in a small cliff. I heard the waves hitting below the cliff and tasted the salt of the sea on my tongue. By now, the sun was slowly beginning to set, so I sat down on a bench facing the sea. Now, it was finally time to drink my wine. So I opened the bottle and poured some of it, then took a sip. The wine tasted velvety and full-bodied. I enjoyed it very much. At last, I had escaped from everyday life and found some real peace. There I sat for a while, sipping my wine and enjoying the view. I checked the time, but I still had over an hour to catch the train home. So I decided to go down to the beach. I packed my stuff back into my bag and went to the edge of the cliff, following the small path down. As I looked up, I saw the sky soaking in a palette of beautiful colors, which were reflected in the sea as well. At the bottom of the little path, I decided to take off my shoes and walk onto the sandy beach in front of me. I took a step, and my foot hit the still warm sand. The sand encircled my foot, and I walked on. A few meters further on, the wide sea stretched in front of me, reaching to the horizon. I lost myself for a moment in the colors of the sea and the sound of the waves. Then I ventured forward a bit, the sea swirling about my feet and the spray teasing gently up my legs. There I stood for a while as it got darker. I walked back up on the beach and sat down in the sand and watched as the stars began to appear in the sky. Thousands upon thousands of shining little dots opened up above me. I noted the moon shining in the distance in the sky, now the only light source apart from the stars. There I sat for a while, looking out toward the horizon and marveling at the wonders of nature. Finally, I arose and moved on along the beach. Then I turned away from the sea and climbed up to a road where a sign noted that it would lead back to the station. I slipped my shoes on. The road was deserted, the stars in the sky my only companions. But after a short time, I recognized in the distance the lights of the small town. The closer I got, the more clearly I heard music and people clapping. I entered the town and came to the large square with the fountain in its center. Here was a small crowd which was moving to the music of a small band. I crossed the square, moving along with the music as well. Then I saw that brick building once again, behind which the station was located. I sat down on a bench and waited for my train. A short time later, I heard the train coming from a distance. From the now deserted station, I climbed onto the train. I sat down in my familiar compartment, which was empty except for me. I rode back through towns, past forests and fields. I looked out the window at the night sky above, filled with shining stars. At a stop just before my hometown, a 40-year-old blonde woman approached me and sat down in my compartment. We smiled at each other, and then she immersed herself in a novel she was carrying. Sometime later, I reached the familiar station of my own city. I left the train, and the station was practically deserted. I slowly strolled back to my house, through my front yard, and up to the door. I entered, set down my bag, and knew it was time to head to bed. As I undressed and slipped under the covers, I reflected on my day, feeling that I had used the time well and added some additional flavor to my life. As I continued to reflect on the sights and smells of the day, I relaxed completely and slipped off into a deep, deep sleep. The end.